You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Trump's appointees issue scathing ruling. We can no longer trust the DOJ, based on an article by J. David McSwan, Pratik Rubala and Carlos Tudillo, ProPublica. The courts are saying what the country already knows: DOJ is no longer acting in good faith. This is not a technical glitch. The story here is not that judges have become unusually skeptical. The story is that the Trump DOJ has made skepticism unavoidable. Federal judges from across the ideological spectrum are saying, in effect, that the Justice Department can no longer be presumed to tell the truth, follow orders, or respect ordinary legal boundaries. That is not a procedural dispute. It is a collapse in institutional reliability at the center of executive power. The actual power sits where it always sits, with the White House and the DOJ leadership that carries out its agenda. The judges are not the source of the crisis. They are the ones forced to name it. The misdirection is the point. The department's public defense is familiar: dedicated public servants, ethical obligations, professionalism, good faith. That language is doing what this administration's language always does. It tries to replace documented conduct with a moral costume. But the source material is not built on vibes. Judges are citing withheld information, false factual claims, inaccurate dates, AI-generated filings with non-existent case law, and conduct that defied court orders. A government that submits fake or sloppily false filings and then demands the court's trust is not asking for deference. It is testing how much deception the judiciary will tolerate before calling it what it is. The point is not that every individual DOJ lawyer is personally corrupt. The point is that the institution is being used to launder political aims through legal process. That is this administration's responsibility, and it sits at the top. Immigration is the engine. The clearest pattern in the article is the centralities of immigration enforcement. The administration's mass deportation agenda is not just a policy preference. It is the organizing logic behind the degradation of legal norms described here. ICD appears repeatedly because ICD is where this presidency's cruelty becomes operational: detention, transfers, subpoenas, raids, and the routine stretching or breaking of process to produce a desired outcome. That is why reform language is inadequate. The problem is not a training deficit or a few rogue officers. It is the existence of an enforcement apparatus built to normalize state violence against immigrants, lawful residents, and even U.S. citizens. If ICD is being used as the delivery system for unconstitutional and dishonest conduct, the answer is not oversight theater. It is abolition. Judges are describing a political assault. What is striking in these rulings is not merely the sharp tone. It is the institutional recognition that the executive branch is using law as a weapon against opponents, vulnerable people, and disfavored institutions. The article notes judges challenging mass firings of federal workers, retaliatory investigations, and immigration cases involving citizens and lawful residents. It also describes a subpoena campaign against Minnesota officials after clashes over ICD raids that reportedly led to the deaths of 2 U.S. citizens. That is not governance under strain. That is coercive power being pointed outward at critics and targets while pretending to be neutral administration. Judge Patrick Schilfer's description of a criminal investigation being used to harass political opponents is the right frame. So is Judge Polizini's view that the government has destroyed the presumption of regularity. These are not rhetorical flourishes. They are legal judgments about an executive branch that is treating ordinary accountability as an obstacle to be bypassed. The real crisis is institutional cowardice. The presumption of regularity was never a gift. It was a practical concession built on the assumption that the government would mostly act in good faith. The Trump DOJ is burning through that assumption because it prefers power without constraint. The judges are responding by demanding sworn statements, referring lawyers for discipline, and refusing to accept the government's word as a substitute for evidence. That is what accountability looks like when a branch of government stops acting like a lawful steward and starts acting like a political machine. The broader pattern is not just one administration's dishonesty. It is the exposure of how fragile democratic legal order becomes when executive agencies are captured by authoritarian incentives and staffed to serve them. Courts can slow that process. They cannot fix it alone. The systemic lesson. This story is about a government learning how to lie in court and expecting obedience to survive the lie. It is about judges noticing that the normal presumption of good faith no longer fits the facts. And it is about a mass deportation state that depends on institutional actors pretending brutalities is routine administration. That is why the story matters beyond the courtroom. Once the DOJ becomes a political enforcement arm, once ICE becomes the engine of coercion, once falsehood is treated as a filing strategy, democracy is no longer being defended by the machinery of government. It is being defended against it. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article. With the automated voice of Arctic, thanks for listening.